Hello there friends, it's Ashley here from the Loopy Lamb and theloopylamb.com, and today we're going to be making a crochet doll poncho, and this is part of our Amigurumi Advent Calendar crochet along. And if you haven't joined yet, that's totally fine. You can join at any time, and I've included a link in the description box below where you can learn all about all of the Advent Calendar crochet along fun and how you can join. So to follow along with today's tutorial, you're going to need worsted weight yarn in two different colors. Today I'm using the colors Marina and Mint in Bravo worsted weight yarn from We Crochet. You're also going to need a 3.5 millimeter or E crochet hook. If you've used another crochet hook for your patterns throughout the crochet along so far, make sure that you're using the same hook that you've been using this whole crochet along. You're going to be needing a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle, some stitch markers, and 2 9mm buttons. So if you're ready to get started, please hit that like button and let's get ready to clear this away and we'll get started crocheting. To start our poncho, I'm starting with the color Marina. You can just start with whatever color you want the main color to be for your poncho. Then you're going to need to do a chain of 40, which I've already done here. So to start with round 1 of our poncho, we're going to place a single crochet in the 7th chain from the hook. So we never count the loop that's on our hook, and we're going to count over 7. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then we're going to single crochet into that 7th chain. We're going to insert our hook, yarn over, pull up a loop. There should be 2 loops on your hook. Then you're going to yarn over and pull through both loops. And now those skipped chains will create our first buttonhole. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the next 7 chains. So now that I have my 8 single crochets, which is your first single crochet and the following 7, I'm going to work 1 single crochet into the next chain. Then I'm going to chain 2, so yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through, and then I'm going to single crochet back into that same chain. And this creates our first point on our poncho. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the next 16 chains. So now that I have my 16 single crochets, I'm going to place 1 single crochet into the next stitch or chain. Then I'm going to chain 2 and single crochet back into that same chain, creating the second point on our poncho. And now you're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the remaining 8 chains. At the end of this round, you should have 36 stitches, plus your chain 6 space at the beginning for your buttonhole. Now we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. And now we are ready to start with row 2. To start with row 2, we're going to single crochet in the first 9 stitches. Now at this point, you should have your chain space. It's a little tricky to see at this point, but if you feel with your fingers, you can feel that there's that little gap for your chain 2 space. And in that space, you're going to place a single crochet, chain 2, and then single crochet back into the chain space. And now you're going to single crochet once into the next 18 stitches. So now I've done my 18 single crochets and we're back at the second chain space here. And into that chain space, we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And now you're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the remaining 9 stitches. At the end of row 2, you should have 40 single crochets. And now to start with row 3, I'm going to chain up 1 and turn my work. And we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the first 10 stitches here. So you're going to start noticing a pattern. We're going to single crochet in each row down to the chain space. And then when we get to that chain space, as we are now, we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into the chain space. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the next 20 stitches. And now that I've got my 20 single crochets, I'm back at that chain space, and we're going to place 1 single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that space. Now you're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the stitches remaining. And at the end of row 3, you should have 44 stitches. And now we are getting ready to start with row 4. We're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. And just before we move on, I just want to show you what your shape of your piece should look like at this point. It should look kind of like half a square. If you can see there, we've got 2 corners and these 3 straight pieces. And we're going to continue to grow in this fashion, and it will always remain this shape. It will just continue to get larger. Okay. So if you find that your pattern isn't in this shape, you've possibly shifted some stitches somewhere and you'll need to take a look. But for row 4 here, we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the first 11 stitches. Now that we have those stitches, we are at the next chain space, and in that chain space, we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And now we're going to single crochet once into each of the next 22 stitches. Now that I have my 22 single crochets, I'm going to work a single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that same chain space. And then we're going to single crochet into each stitch until the end. At the end of row 4, you should have 48 single crochets. Now we are going to need to change colors for the next row, so make sure when you get to this last stitch, you don't finish it off with the old color. We're going to leave that last yarn over undone because we're going to need our second color. So we're going to bring in that second color, and then we're going to finish the last yarn over on our single crochet with the new color. Then we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. Now you don't have to change colors if you don't want the stripes in the poncho. You can continue on with your main color if you want a solid colored poncho. I've seen some folks already making theirs in variegated colorways, and they look really great. So you can choose to do the stripes or not. That's up to your personal preference. So for row 5, we're going to single crochet into the first 12 stitches. And now I'm back at that chain space. And so I'm going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet into the chain space. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet. Goodness, sorry, the yarn's getting all over the place here. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the next 24 stitches. And now that I've done those stitches, I'm back at the next chain space. And in that chain space, I'm going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the remaining 12 stitches. At the end of row 5, you should have 52 single crochets. And now we are ready to start with row 6, and we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. And now we are going to single crochet once into each of the first 13 stitches. And now we're at that chain space, and we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet into that chain space. Now, I should have mentioned this earlier, but I want to remember to mention this now, is that if you are having trouble finding those chain spaces, that's where the stitch markers come in handy, and you can just place a stitch marker in that chain space and just move it up with each consecutive round to keep track of those chain spaces. Okay, so now that we've turned our corner here, we are going to place 1 single crochet into each of the next 26 stitches. Okay, and now that I've got those stitches, I'm back at my chain space, and I'm going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And then we're going to single crochet into each of the remaining stitches. There should be 13 remaining here. At the end of this round, we're going to change colors back to our first color if we're doing the stripes. So in my last stitch here, I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. And then I'm going to switch over to my second color, or technically my first color at this point. I'm just going to leave a loop here so that way I can cut and weave in the ends. If you prefer, you can weave crochet over your ends. But rather than cut them all on screen, I'm just going to leave a little loop there and I'll deal with them after. So now we are ready to start with row 7. So we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the first 14 stitches. And then I'm at the chain space, so I'm going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into the chain space. And now I'm going to single crochet into each of the next 28 stitches. And now I'm back at that at the second chain space, so I'm going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And now I'm going to single crochet into each of the remaining 14 stitches. And now we're ready to move on to row 8, and we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. And here we're going to single crochet into the first 15 stitches. And now we're at our first chain space, and we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And then we're going to single crochet into each of the next 30 stitches. All right, and now we're at our second chain space, and we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And then we're going to single crochet into each of the remaining 15 stitches. And now we are ready to start row 9. And to start row 9, we're going to chain 6 and turn our work. Then we're going to skip the 6 chains, and we're going to single crochet into the the next single crochet here. So those skipped chains will become our second buttonhole. And then we're going to single crochet into the next 15 stitches. So we already have 1 single crochet. So by the time we get to that first chain space, we should have 16 single crochet stitches. And now we are at the first chain space, and again we're going to put that single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet all in the same chain space. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the next 32 stitches. And now we are at our next chain space, and we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into the chain space. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the remaining 16 stitches. And now we are getting ready to start with row 10. At the end of row 9, at this point you should have 68 stitches. And then you also have that chain 6 space that's going to be our buttonhole. So we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work for row 10. And we're going to single crochet into each of the first 17 stitches. And now we're at our first chain space, and we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet all in that chain space there. And now we're going to single crochet into the next 34 stitches. And now we are at our second chain space, and again we're going to single crochet into that chain space, chain 2, and single crochet back into the chain space. And now you're going to single crochet in the remaining 17 stitches. Now we're going to be changing colors at the end of this row, so don't finish off the last stitch until you have done the last yarn over with the new color. At the end of row 10, we change to our second color, which I've already done here, and we're going to chain 1 and turn again, which I've done here, and then we're going to single crochet into the first 18 stitches to start row 11. And so now I'm at our first chain space, and into that chain space we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and then single crochet back into the chain space. And now we're going to single crochet into each of the next 36 stitches. All right, so now we have all of those stitches worked, and we're at the next chain space, so we're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into the chain space. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the remaining 18 stitches. And now we are ready to start with row 12. We're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. At the end of row 11, you should have 76 stitches. For row 12, we're going to single crochet into each of the first 19 stitches. Right, now we are back at our chain space. We're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into the chain space. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the next 38 stitches. And now we're back at our second chain space, and into that chain space we're going to work 1 single crochet, chain 2, and then single crochet back into the same chain space. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the remaining 19 stitches. The end of row 12 here, we should have 80 single crochets. And at the end of this row, we are going to be changing back to our main color. Right, so now that we're on our last stitch of row 12, we're going to leave that last yarn over unfinished, and we're going to bring in the other color. We're going to finish that stitch with the new color. And now we're going to chain up 1 and turn our work. And we are ready to start row 13. So we're going to work 1 single crochet into each of the first 20 stitches. And now we're at the first chain space. We're going to single crochet, chain 2, and single crochet back into that chain space. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the next 40 stitches. All right, and now we are at our second chain space, and into that chain space we're going to work that single crochet, chain 2, and then single crochet back into the chain space. And now we're going to place 1 single crochet into each of the remaining 20 stitches. The end of this round, you should have 84 stitches. Okay, and at this point we are ready to finish off. So I'm going to cut my yarn, and then I'm going to chain up one to secure it and pull that through. And so at this point our piece should look like this. Should be this kind of like a big square. It almost looks like a raglan top if you've ever done one of those. And at this point you'll weave in your ends, and you're going to need your buttons for the next step. Now I forgot to mention at the beginning that you're going to need sewing needle and thread to sew those on, so I do apologize about that, but if you have those handy, you're going to need them. So you're going to fold your poncho in half after you've weaved in all your ends. So we're just going to line our corners up, and it should look like this. And you're going to find the place where your chain 6 spaces kind of fold over onto the opposite side of the fabric here. And that's where you're going to sew your buttons. So for this one, I would place this here, right? It doesn't have to be like super perfect right now, but that looks good to me. You can even try this on your doll before committing to where you want to secure your buttons. And then here, I would sew this one here. And then when it goes on your doll, this will do up on the shoulder of the doll. And that's how you make an easy crochet doll poncho. A fun way to customize this, if you did do the stripes, you could use this second color here and create a fringe or add some tassels to it. And you could do that even if you didn't use the contrasting color, you can add those as well, but it just looks really fun if you use the contrasting color to continue with that visual interest. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please hit that like button and please consider subscribing to this channel. If you like free crochet patterns, please check out my blog, theloopylamb.com. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. Thanks so much for watching, friends. Happy hooking, and I'll see you next time.